In a moment, you'll be introduced to the project team and they'll take you through a short presentation detailing the project, after which the team will be available to answer any questions you may have. Many of you have already submitted questions in advance. However, if you have further questions, then please do submit these using the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. This event is scheduled to run until 7:15, and we hope to answer all of your questions in the time available. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Ian Long.
Thank you, Bob, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian Long, Divisional Operations Director for ISG Limited, and we are developing proposals for the large storage and distribution warehouse facility on the land between Cleckheaton and Scholes village. We are currently undertaking public consultation with residents and businesses in the area prior to submitting a planning application to Kirklees Council. Many people have already submitted feedback via the website, and we are looking at all of these comments as part of the consultation process. In normal times, a public exhibition might be held, but COVID guidelines make a live webinar the alternative choice. A number of questions about the plans have already been submitted, and we'll take these after a brief presentation from members of the development team here tonight. Before we run the presentation that we recorded earlier, let me introduce you to the team for this evening. Sally Miles, Director of First Plan, the planning consultants, who will talk about the location, the planning background and future jobs. Simon Rispin, Director of SMR, who will talk about the design and layout of the scheme. Brett Coles, Director of FPCR, Environment and Design, who will talk about the landscaping and visual aspects of the scheme. Ian Dix, Director of Vectos, the transport consultants, who will talk about the traffic and highways considerations. Simon Johnson, Environmental Planning Associate with Delta Simons, who will talk about the environment considerations. And I will talk about the construction aspects, including the proposed programme. After the presentation, we will have a live Q&A session to respond to the submitted questions. Now, Bob, if you could run the presentation, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. The proposal is for a storage and distribution warehouse facility. The scheme represents a significant investment for the Kirklees area and will create a substantial number of jobs, comprising in the region of 1,500 jobs once opened and approximately 800 jobs during the construction phase. ISG Retail Limited are the applicant, who have significant experience delivering logistics and employment developments of this nature. The team are working towards submitting a planning application in June this year. A public consultation exercise is being undertaken in advance of this submission. A community newsletter has been posted to approximately 7,000 households and businesses in the local area, which you will hopefully have received. There is also a consultation website which provides details of the scheme and a link to a feedback form which can be used to provide comments to the development team. And these will be passed on to the local authority as part of the planning application submission. This community webinar is also being held to explain the proposals and to provide feedback to the questions raised to date. The site extends approximately 23 hectares and is currently agricultural land. You can see from the slide that it is located to the northwest of Cleckheaton, to the east of Scholes village, to the southwest of Cleckheaton Golf Course, and directly to the west of Junction 26 of the M62 and the M606, which is known as the Chain Bar Interchange. You can see from the slide that the site is allocated in the adopted Kirklees local plan as an employment site. Therefore, the proposed storage and distribution employment use fully accords with the site allocation and local plan policy. However, it is acknowledged that it is very important to fully consider the design of and any potential impacts associated with the proposal. The application will be accompanied by a full set of technical assessments. Some of the key members of the team are here this evening to discuss those technical considerations. I hand over to Simon, the architect.
Thank you, Sally. The proposal provides a cutting-edge warehouse facility, incorporating the latest technologies in regard to how products are stored and distributed to support the growing online requirements of so many operators. This provides a strong mix between modern technology whilst dependent on significant job creation. The warehouse itself is made up of a number of key elements. Firstly, a large multi-level warehouse across 3 floors, storage at the upper floors and product sortation at the ground floor. This provides by far the majority of the floor area. This is supported by a large 5,500 square metre, about 60,000 square foot office element, providing a modern, light office arrangement for the supporting roles relevant to the warehouse space, including lockers and changing facilities, break rooms, large open plan offices and smaller conference rooms and meeting rooms. You can see this as a block towards the bottom of the warehouse. Various circulation cores and additional welfare facilities wrap around the perimeter of the warehouse, each providing break rooms close to operational tasks and easy circulation around the building for the operators. The overall building is around 23 metres in height. It measures 317 metres in length and around 178 metres wide at its widest point. That adds up to a total of 265,600 square metres overall, which is about 2.85 million square foot. The warehouse itself has a dedicated delivery service yard to 3 sides, to the top and to the left and right on plan. This has loading docks and lorry parking, whilst the office overlooks the car parking across 2 levels, shown at the bottom of the plan. The car park area includes provision for cycle storage, motorbikes, and then provides bus links and strong pedestrian links, all serviced by 2 access points, which Ian will pick up on later. The building design itself is carefully considered to respond to both site-specific constraints and the internal operation. It is designed for the latest building requirements with strong environmental credentials. I'll leave Brett to cover off wider site elements and how the development sits within the landscape.
Thank you, Simon. The principal development in this landscape has been accepted by the local plan allocation for employment uses. Nevertheless, the team has developed various design and mitigation measures to address the impact of the development on landscape character and visual amenity. The iterative process of the environmental impact assessment, which has included producing a landscape and visual impact assessment, has resulted in several design and mitigation measures to lessen the landscape and visual impact of the development. This has included site levels and earthworks, a green infrastructure of new landscape habitats, and the elevational design of the building. Design and mitigation measures. Site levels. Consideration of how to locate the built development within the site has sought to balance the need for a level development platform for the building and at the same time to sensitively integrate the development into the site. This has included reducing the ground levels in the southern part of the site so that the built development, to include service areas, effectively sit lower. Bunds, ground modelling and wooden planting are combined to provide filtering and softening of views of the development. Elevational design. To minimise the visual impact of the building, the elevational design includes a series of graded horizontal banding from dark grey to light grey on each side of the building. This takes the form of a dark grey band at ground floor level, with the bands gradually lightening to much lighter grey at the top, as you can see from this indicative CGI. The use of a recessive colour within the landscape, such as grey, and the banding technique is a widely accepted design approach for buildings of this type, as it helps to minimise the visual impact of the building. Elevations, sections and images will be submitted with the application to explain the process and to show the appearance of the building. Green infrastructure landscape framework. To assist in integrating the development into the landscape, the scheme incorporates a green infrastructure strategy of new landscape habitats, as can be seen from the illustrative master plan. This includes landscaping around the perimeter of the site in the form of new native woodland planting, the creation of species-rich hedgerows, the planting of a large number of individual trees, and the introduction of varied grassland habitats with a focus on wildlife benefits. Once established and mature, these will provide a variety of wildlife habitats across the site, whilst planting will help integrate the development into the landscape by softening and filtering views. This strategy is considered to be an appropriate design response to minimise visual impacts, and at the same time will deliver long-term benefits for biodiversity and landscape character. And now I'd like to hand you over to Ian.
Thank you, Brett. As you can see from looking at the plans in front of you of the layout, there are two accesses to the site. The one from the north onto the A58 Whitehall Road is for HGVs only, and all HGVs will come in from that direction. Cars, motorcycles and cycles being used by staff and visitors will be able to access from both the A58, but also from the separate access to the south from Whitechapel Road. HGV parking is located across the site, as you can see on the layout plan, and there's sufficient parking to accommodate all HGVs on the site, so you won't get parking of HGVs on roads around the site. Also on the layout you can see that there's parking again for staff and visitors, for cars, motorcycles and cyclists. The site also accommodates buses, and buses can be used at peak times of the year to bring staff directly to the site. There's an existing footpath across the site that will need to be rerouted, and there will be a new connection from Whitechapel Road to Whitehall Road running north-south. Looking now at the implications of the site, the background for this is the site was allocated for employment uses in the local plan. That followed modelling to look at the off-site implications of the site being developed by Kirklees Council and Highways England. The proposed development you see before you now actually generates less traffic than the scheme that was allocated in the local plan. Looking at staff shift changeover times, for any logistics developer, they are outside of the traditional traffic peaks. You won't see traffic between 8 and 9 in the morning and 5 and 6 in the evening. Also, those shift changeovers won't coincide with the start and end of the school day. Discussions are underway at the moment with both Kirklees Council and Highways England about the key transport issues that around the site. And this includes on the A58 and at the Chain Bar junction. When the planning application is submitted, it will be supported by a detailed transport assessment that sets out all of this work. In addition to this, there will be a travel plan which will encourage staff not to drive to the site and to use more sustainable modes. And there'll also be an operational management plan, a car park management plan, and a delivery and servicing plan that will support the proposed development, and they're designed to ensure that the operation of the site doesn't have an adverse impact on the surrounding road network. And now I'll hand over to Simon.
Thank you, Ian. Our role is to manage the environmental impact assessment process. This is a level of assessment above what would usually be required for a planning application and requires all of the assessments to be undertaken in a similar and comparable way so the impacts can be measured. The mitigation can be included in the design process, and outcomes in respect to the environment are clear, regardless of which technical chapter you are looking at. The environmental statement will cover a number of different specialist chapters, like those listed on screen. And just to give examples of the additional upfront work that needs to go into this process, archaeological trenching and ground investigation surveys have already been done, both of which would usually only happen after permission has been granted. The impacts from the proposed traffic has also been assessed and modelled with respect to noise and air quality on the environment, and also a suite of ecological surveys have also been completed to feed into this assessment work. This is also the baseline environmental information is truly representative. Once completed, the environmental statement will document all relevant impacts from this process and include a summary of those, along with any required mitigations summarised in one table. There will also be a non-technical summary detailing what impacts can be expected. This would sit alongside any other reports and documents normally required for a planning application. I'll now hand over to Ian.
Thank you, Simon. Now on to programme. The project is targeted to start in early 2022 for a completion in the summer of 2023. The works will consist of the heavy earthworks for the first couple of months, moving into the building, the main body of the building for approximately six months, and the final 6 to 8 months being internal fit out, which is obviously the less intrusive part of the construction process. Standard construction hours will be adopted as agreed with the local authority, and any out of hours working will be agreed by exception. Some activities such as concrete finishing will inevitably fall outside of the standard working hours. The construction itself and the site setup, the site boundary will be secured throughout its perimeter with various different types of fencing, acoustic fences to protect the public and the residents, and environmental fencing to protect the more sensitive environmental areas that exist on site. Primary access and egress will be formed off the Whitehall Road, and our internal haulage routes will be formed in the location of the roads and the yards as the planned design. All our welfare and subcontract offices, site parking, material storage, etc. will be created on the hard standings as works proceed, and these will be in areas that will be finally designated as car parks and service yards in the finished scheme. All deliveries will be controlled with time slots under a principle of a just-in-time delivery to minimise congestion, and all site traffic controlled under a detailed management plan. The works on site will be undertaken in line with current industry standards for good practice and monitored in a various series of action plans, including environmental impact, social interaction, traffic and waste management, to reduce the negative impacts in these areas. Sympathetic construction technologies will be adopted wherever possible, such as augured piling, crunching rather than breaking, low vibration machinery, etc. Dust and noise monitoring will be ongoing throughout to, again, reduce impact and nuisance to the surrounding area. Vehicles and pedestrian segregation will be implemented from the outset, and all the public footpaths will be maintained around the perimeter of the project. Work will be undertaken using approximately 80 subcontractors, with a workforce rising to a peak of about 800 at its max. Monitoring of the works will be undertaken firstly by our site team. We'll have a comprehensive site team experienced in this level of work, and also supported by our internal audits and audits by our specialist departments for quality, environment and social engagement. And finally, this will all be monitored regularly by independent bodies such as considerate constructors and other independent health and safety environmental consultants employed by ourselves and the client. I'd now like to pass you over to Sally.
Thank you, Ian. The facility will employ in the region of 1,500 staff. Modern storage and distribution facilities provide a wide range of job opportunities, such as engineering and IT professionals, general management and HR roles, together with staff to manage and process customer orders. In addition, there are jobs for catering and support staff, cleaners, landscapers and security personnel, along with many others. The application will contain a commitment to sign up to a recruitment and training plan. The final occupier will work with the local authority and local agencies to target local areas for recruitment and commit to offering the training to enable staff to progress through the organisation. As Ian has just said, the construction phase will also provide substantial job opportunities, creating at least 800 jobs.
Thank you, Sally. And now I'll hand over to Bob, who will introduce the individual questions and the panel can respond accordingly. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. And as Ian says, we now turn to the question and answer part of this evening's session. And a number of you have already pre-submitted questions, but we do encourage you, invite you to submit questions again in addition this evening using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, which I note some of you are doing. And we'll try and get through as many questions as we can in the next 45 minutes or so. We have consolidated some of these questions because, of course, there is some overlap. And so to try and get through as many questions as possible, we will try and group them together. And the first lot of those questions relates to Whitechapel Road, the access to the site and the general impact. We've had a number of questions about this. Why the development is proposing an access for cars and buses on Whitechapel Road, how much and what type of traffic this will involve, how this traffic might impact on Scholes village and the schools there, and how the traffic will be managed.
I wonder if Ian Dix, our transport consultant, could pick that up, please.
Thanks, Sally. It might be useful if we can have the master plan layout on the screen, please. I'll make a start while we're waiting for that. As you saw from the layout plan, there were two accesses proposed to the scheme. The main one being to the north, which is to Whitehall Road, which is the A58, which is a main distributor road. That will take traffic over to the chain bar roundabout and onto the motorway network. That access will be used by all HGVs. And we can control that through a variety of measures, but particularly the delivery and servicing plan that will be submitted. All the HGVs that come to the site are quite strictly controlled. They have allocated times which to arrive, and their routes can be set as well. So we can make sure that they're using that route. There is a second access onto Whitechapel Road. Whitechapel Road is a secondary distributor road. That access would be used by some staff and visitors coming to the site. We've looked at the figures and we think there's about a 50-50 split of that traffic, i.e. staff cars, visitor cars using the southern access. In terms of how we determine that, we look at what's called a gravity model based on the population around the site, i.e. where people working at the site will come from. That methodology will be agreed as we submit a transport assessment that supports the planning application, and I'll come back to that in a second. In terms of shift patterns, as I mentioned before, this is when there'd be traffic coming to and from the site. They'll be outside of the traffic peak periods, but they'll also be away from the start and end times of the schools as well. In terms of how we then assess the development, just to say a little bit about that, it's something we're working through at the moment with Kirklees Council on the local roads and Highways England. They've identified a number of roads and junctions for us to look at. We're going through that assessment process at the moment. Part of that assessment is we look at obviously the traffic associated with this development, but we also look at do a cumulative assessment of traffic from other developments as well to make sure it's a robust assessment. That will all be set out in a transport assessment, as I mentioned, that will support the application. The other things, documents that we will produce that I mentioned briefly in the presentation are a travel plan, which is how we will encourage people coming to and from the site not to use their cars, or at least a car share. We'll do the delivery and servicing plan, which will set out exactly how HGVs coming to and from the site are managed. There'll be a car park management plan, because we will make sure that the car parking and the HGV parking, it's sufficient to accommodate all of the needs of the site.
but also it does need to be managed. And then there'll be an operational management plan. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of work that goes on to actually consider the traffic implications around the site. And we'll be looking in detail what happens on Whitehall Road and Whitechapel Road, and all of that information will be submitted in support of the planning application. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. And then staying with traffic, a couple of specific questions. HGV construction traffic on the B6120 Whitechapel Road, which is a school commute car and as footballers as well at the weekend. And it's suggested here it's unsuitable for access to the site. Can you perhaps expand upon that?
If I could perhaps pass to Ian Long as it relates to sort of the construction phase traffic.
Our construction, yes, by all means. Our construction traffic, again, our intention would be to form the entrance onto the A58 from the early stages of the project, and that would be our primary entrance for construction traffic. We don't anticipate construction traffic in terms of deliveries and lorries, etc., using the entrance on the Whitechapel Road.
Thank you, Ian. And then looking at pollution levels related to traffic, what are the current pollution levels at the local primary school, and what impact will the extra traffic have on those levels?
I wonder if Simon Johnson could just deal with environmental matters, please.
Yeah, sure, Sally. Ultimately, as discussed in the presentation, we'll be doing an environmental impact assessment, which will cover noise and air quality pollution, and that will also include data from predicted traffic levels on those local roads as well. So it's going to be a robust assessment, and when it's finished, that will be submitted with the planning application, and it will show sensitive receptors and how they're affected and what level of effect that is. And that'll be submitted, and then obviously you'll have a chance to comment and review those.
And staying with the HGV traffic, the impact on the A58 and the Chain Bar motorway, and also about the perceived increase of traffic in the surrounding area and the mitigation measures that will be put in place.
Ian Dix, would you mind just covering that?
We've undertaken a number of traffic surveys around the site. They were undertaken at various times because we had to be careful in terms of the lockdown that we've all been experiencing when we undertook those surveys, to make sure we were getting a robust level of traffic. So we've got that data that we can use as a basis for all of our assessments. That allows us to look at both at the capacity of the surrounding road network to make sure that we're not creating any issues there. The other thing that we do is we also look at the safety implications. So there's information available on road traffic accidents. So we look at whether there are any clusters of accidents and whether the traffic associated with the development would worsen those problems. That's another part of the assessment that we do. In terms of Chain Bar roundabout in particular, that's something we've been discussing with Highways England, and they're actually going to provide us their traffic model of that junction so we can assess our impacts at that junction. And as I said, all of this will be in the transport assessment that will support the planning application. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks very much. We now turn to a number of questions that have been submitted with regard to planning in general, I think. The first of which is, why are you planning to build on Greenbelt?
Okay, well, I can cover that point. This site has been allocated for employment purposes through the local plan process. There's an identified need and there's pressure for further employment and housing development in all local authorities across the country. As part of a local plan process, evidence is submitted and local authorities consider the need for development sites, their most appropriate location, and if land, green belt or other greenfield sites need to be released as part of that process. So that was a thorough assessment was undertaken as part of that review, and this site has been identified as an appropriate site for employment uses, including B8 storage and distribution. So So this has been identified as the correct location for any future operations that might come to this area.
Thank you, Sally. And the next question related to planning. How can you justify placing this development so close to a motorway junction that is already amongst the busiest in the country?
So again, as part of the local plan process, they will have assessed issues such as traffic impact and whether this is an appropriate location. I think Ian's probably covered, but if I just briefly pass on to Ian to just cover the point in terms of its proximity to the motorway.
Yes, so one thing obviously we'll look at in terms of where the access is located, it has to meet all of the relevant design standards. So the access will be designed in accordance with the DFT's guidance, and it will be subject to a road safety audit. Part of the assessment that I've talked about, the transport assessment, we look at the capacity of the site access, and we'll look at the capacity of chain bar in terms of the traffic flows through there and when traffic will come to and from this site. I've already mentioned that the shift changeovers will be outside of the traditional traffic peaks, which are generally around 8 to 9 and 5 to 6. And that's taken into account in our assessment. And that's how we look at this. You have to remember, when we're assessing any new development proposal, any occupier who's coming to the site will need to have confidence that the site will work for them as well. So we do it to look for the operator, for yourselves as well, and for the highway authorities. And the highway authorities, who in this case are Kirklees and Highways England, do independently check all of our work.
The next question, has the impact of this proposed development on other local distribution businesses been considered?
As part of any planning application, there's a necessity to consider cumulative impacts. So we will have agreed with the authority in terms of traffic assessments and environmental assessments if there are any other sites that need to be cumulatively assessed as part of that process. Whilst it isn't an absolute requirement to consider competition on specific local businesses and competition with other local storage and distribution businesses, we will be submitting an economic assessment accompanying the application, and this considers the existing employment land supply within an area, the demand for additional uses and employment uses within the area, and also goes on to assess the type of jobs and the number of jobs that could be created with this form of development and the net benefits in jobs. So it will consider if any of those jobs are diverted from other businesses within the area. So there will be, whilst direct competition between businesses isn't necessarily a strict planning factor, all of those elements will be considered within an economic assessment that will be accompanying the planning application.
Thank you. And then the next question relates to, I guess, the cumulative number of developments currently happening within the area. Has that been considered as part of this?
So I think, as I've mentioned, in terms of all the specialisms, we will have agreed with the local authority any other sites which need to be assessed as forms of cumulative impact. So I don't know if I just briefly pass to Simon Johnson in terms of that, as in relation to the topics covered in the ES.
Yeah, sure, Sally. So the environmental impact assessment and the environmental statement that will be submitted covers in combination effects between different disciplines such as highway, vehicle movements and air quality and such, and it also covers cumulative impacts for those disciplines. So, for example, if there are significant tall buildings with a new tall building, then their interactions would be assessed. And if there's significant traffic from some of the new in planning, under construction developments that create transport, for example, they'll also be considered in the transport model, which will then be assessed for air quality and noise as well. So they are considered, and there's a set list that we've obviously sent over to the council to consider whether that's an appropriate list of their new developments in the area.
Thank you. How will you mitigate the detrimental effects on the village, including increased traffic, impact on the environment, and the resulting plunging property prices, it says here?
If I perhaps pass to Simon Johnson first to talk about the general environmental impacts, and then perhaps Ian could discuss traffic in particular.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, in terms of the environmental impact assessment, that'll cover sensitive receptors, which include ecological sites, it includes residential uses and others. And that's from a range of topics which were listed previously. And that's what will be provided with the planning application that will be available for you to look at and scrutinise. And any mitigation that's required as part of the development, bearing in mind that the environmental assessment has fed into the design process so that mitigation can be embedded along the way rather than having a lot of extra additional mitigation. Those new or additional mitigation measures will be included within that submission as well to minimise impacts.
Would you just like to briefly touch on, I think you have already, the sort of the mitigation measures that are in place in terms of traffic?
Yes, I will do. Yeah, in terms of the mitigation for traffic, we're looking to control that by using the access out onto the A58, as I've said, for HGVs, and making sure that the southern access is only used by some staff and visitors who will be coming to the site from the roads in that direction. So I think it's really about managing the traffic and how it arrives and leaves the site.
Thank you. And then staying with environmental impact, how will biodiversity be offset?
Brett, if you wouldn't mind covering ecology issues.
Yeah, of course, Sally. So as we've said on the presentation tonight, we've undertaken a lot of ecology surveys across the site for the last year or so, and that's considered protected species and the value of the site for ecology. In terms of its value, it is a comparatively limited ecological value because of the agricultural nature of the site. But having said that, the development proposals are developing and delivering a fairly extensive landscape framework of new habitats to include woodland, hedgerows, trees, etc., which will ultimately provide a better quality, if you like, of wildlife habitats within the site than currently exists. And this process will be explained through the environmental statement, and the local authority will be involved in reviewing the work that we've done. And there may well be opportunities further down the line through the planning process where additional measures may be needed in terms of biodiversity gains. But in terms of the offsetting, there's obviously going to be a change on the site in terms of the built development coming into a greenfield site, which is inevitable for any sort of development. But the design approach that we're adopting is to deliver a variety of habitats that can provide increased biodiversity value on the site.
Thank you very much. And another specific question relating to environment. What will you do about surface drainage? Because this area floods regularly.
Simon Johnson, would you mind picking up the drainage points?
Yeah, no problem. In the course of a normal planning application, there will be a requirement to provide drainage scheme, usually a high level scheme that details how flood risk would not occur off-site. In this situation, because it's an environmental impact assessment and we're going into specific detail, the full drainage design will be provided as part of the application. It will demonstrate how flood risk will not be increased off-site and surface water will be contained and disposed of at the required runoff rates, which will be reviewed by the councils and the lead local flood authority. And that information will be available for you to review also, of course.
Thank you. And then another question, which I think we may have touched on, but let me ask it anyway. What are you going to do about safety and pollution?
I wonder actually if Simon, if you could explain the layout and how that addresses safety elements, perhaps as the first instance.
Yeah, of course, if we can bring up the master plan slide, perhaps that'll help. Site safety is obviously inherent to developments of this kind. It's acknowledged. We do need to deal with the HGVs moving around the site alongside pedestrians through the site and around the site as well. There is significant HGV parking within the yard. That means that we get as many HGVs off the network as quickly as we can. Between the access from the highway and the gatehouse controlling safety and security of the yard, there's significant areas of stacking for HGVs to wait at the gatehouse. So, in safety measures, we pull everybody off the highway as quickly as we can for HGVs. There's safe pedestrian routes around the site. We've got cycleways which are dedicated for them, and it is about separation of people moving around the site and the HGV movements. If you look at safety on a wider context, part of our work to date has included consultations with the police. Those have all been positive. We continue that dialogue with them and will do so until the completion of the development. And that will include discussions around site safety through the construction phase, but also long-term safety aspects of the site.
Simon, while you are discussing that, can I just ask a supplementary question which has just been submitted, which I think relates a little bit to what you've just said there about stacking. The traffic queues up both sides of the A58. How do you propose to solve this, given that you are adding a junction?
That's probably one for Ian, if I can pass to him.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to solve all of the existing traffic issues in the area. There are clearly demands there, and there is queuing at junctions. As I've explained, that queuing occurs more during the traditional traffic peaks, and as a distribution warehouse, any operator who takes this site, their shift patterns will be outside of those periods. There's not queuing there throughout the day. So yes, we're not going to be solving all of the traffic problems. That's not something that it's possible to do, but we won't be adding to them due to the time of the movements that we've got.
And then we have a number of questions related to the building itself. What is the reason for having a 4-storey building which can be seen from miles around, especially as it is at the top of a hill?
I wonder if Simon Rispin could just briefly run through the design aspects and the needs for the building first, and then perhaps if Brett could just talk about the approach being taken in terms of visual impact.
Yeah, by all means. So the building sits within the site. There is a balance around the site in terms of what we would call a cut and fill to find the best level for the building to sit within the site. That means it is sat partway down the existing gradient of the site, which works for a number of reasons. In terms of the actual overall building size, buildings of this type are designed to fulfill specific requirements around quantum of product, mass in terms of meeting a demand of a geographical area and as part of a kind of national requirement of infrastructure. The building envelope then surrounds and envelopes a pretty complex automation and mechanical handling system across a number of floors. Some of those are with very high-tech automation, others have more employees and so on across them. All of those get quite good amounts of daylight into anywhere where those people work. So it gets to a point where you need a critical mass for a building of this type to work efficiently. In terms of that envelope, then we have elevational treatment, which Brett covered in the presentation, where we're following well-established and trusted principles of grading buildings out with a darker colour at the bottom, fading out to lighter colours, as you see on the image on the screen. That in turn is then supported by a significant landscape structural solution, which hopefully Brett can pick up on.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Simon said, we've sort of explained in the presentation tonight about the considerations of the building in terms of the visual aspects of it, and we have done as a team a lot of work to try and integrate the building into the landscape by using best practice measures, and in terms of the colours and the banding that we are adopting on the elevational design, that has a huge benefit in terms of minimising the bulk of the the bulk of the building, if you like, in terms of its mass and scale, and that's a commonly used approach, and would be successful in this landscape. The other element is obviously the woodland planting and the tree cover that we're providing around the perimeter of the site, which again assists in helping to integrate the building into the landscape, particularly from wider areas of the landscape. So we sort of acknowledge the fact that we've got to address this through design measures, and so a combination of the building elevation, the siting of the building in the site itself in terms of the levels, in terms of dropping the levels in certain areas, and in addition to that, the green infrastructure of new planting, all combine, if you like, to minimise the visual impact of the building. And I just reiterate really that this site is allocated for employment, so therefore the principle of employment and buildings of this type in this landscape has been effectively accepted in a way through the local plan process. But nevertheless, it's important that we have developed these design measures to minimise the impact of the building on views, and also on in terms of the landscape impact as well.
If I could just reassure everybody as in terms of ISG and the construction process, in terms of health and safety, ISG treat health and safety as their #1 priority at all times, and we pride ourselves on our impeccable record for minimal accidents and riddles, etc. We employ the first tier level of supplier, subcontractor, and we scrutinise those. They undergo a level of scrutiny before we will engage them. All our staff on site are all trained in health and safety matters, and we have a designated team of which there will be on-site health and safety advisor, and we have a designated team of health and safety and environmental support, which will be there to continuously monitor, to audit, and to ensure that we upheld, and our site team upholds all ISG's key principles at all times, and make sure that we continuously communicate and work with the people in the surroundings and the neighbours, and ensure that we keep safety at our utmost priority. So rest assured that is #1 as far as ISG are concerned. Thank you.
Just on that, I'd just like to wind back a little bit, because I think the question, it referred to both safety and pollution, and I just didn't want to skip over that. In terms of pollution, I've obviously covered air quality in terms of that assessment methodology. Noise is another one which will be assessed in the environmental statement, and we can obviously show what mitigation would be required for that, if any, in different places. There's also light pollution that will also be covered within the environmental statement, and in terms of contamination to ground, we've done extensive ground investigations which may have been seen on site at some point in the past, and what we have to do in terms of the environmental statement is assess and make sure that no existing contamination, although limited given that the previous uses do not have pathways and linkages to, for example, the water bodies, and the drainage strategy we'll have to make sure that that's carried through as well. So just want to make sure that that's covered as well. And during the construction process, I'm sure Ian will be able to refer, there's a construction environmental management plan which details what happens in terms of pollution incidents, in terms of dust, air control, in terms of vibration and noise as well. So these documents will be available at submission, and whilst sometimes these are after the fact as part of conditions and stuff like that, they will be seen at the application submission stage.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions relating to the height of the building. So I wonder if someone could please talk a little to the height of the building and what's being done to mitigate that. And also a very specific question about the height of the building above ground level for the north corner adjacent to Whitehall Road.
Simon Rispin, would you be able to run through that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can again bring the master plan slide up, that may help. So as we've talked about, we all acknowledge the slope across the site, and then it is a careful balance for a number of reasons to try and establish the best position for the building sat within the plot. The building itself takes up about a third of the overall plot. Around the edge of that, obviously, there's the yards and then the significant landscaping and things which we've covered. The high point, as it were, on Whitechapel Road is about 20 metres above the low point on Whitehall Road. We sit almost plumb in the middle of those two, as it were. So the building sits on a level of around 131, with the low point being at 120 and the high point being at 142. We've talked about the building's height as an overall. It's probably worth just touching on how that is made up. The main warehouse in the middle, the kind of big rectangular boxes, is the taller part of that. But around that, there are various smaller elements which break up the mass. So at each corner, there's the staircores and welfare facilities and break rooms and driver hubs and things, all of which are at a lower point and a lower height to that overall maximum. And then the office block at the front, so at the bottom of the page there, that's a single story element. So there's a maximum height which we acknowledge and we've talked about, and we've talked about the elevational treatment to try and diminish that as we can, and then how the landscape works around that. But there are various elements which are much lower than that. So hopefully that answers that one.
Thank you. And then the next question relates to the eco credentials of the building, and we've had a few additional questions submitted in the last 10 minutes on this. Will the warehouse provide any of its own renewable energy? Also, whether electric car charging points will be provided within the car park.
Simon Rispin, are you happy to pick up the general eco credentials?
Yeah, I think as with all major developers, there is a number of acknowledgements across the piece around meeting or in this case exceeding expectations of minimum insulation standards, minimum levels of sustainable inputs and things like that. So the developer has net zero targets in terms of being fully net zero across the development, well ahead of the government dates as a business. In terms of the building itself on here, I noticed one of the questions was regarding BREEAM, and that is that's a measure of sustainability, but it also picks up a lot of other things about employee welfare and things, and there's a grading scheme of how that is. This is very much part of the process that we're adopting. We're expecting to achieve a very good rating here. That's the developer's own wish as much as anything else, and that comes from a number of things. It comes from having greater insulation to the building, so less energy use than is required by building regulations. Lighting within the warehouse, a thing we would use LEDs throughout. We have more windows on this than a more traditional warehouse of this size to get more natural light that offers a better experience for the employees, but it also means that we reduce our energy usages overall. In terms of renewables and things, there's an anticipation that there will be some photovoltaics, there will be elements of that, and that all forms a quite complex picture of how we will deal with the sustainability and energy question. But it is absolutely at the foresight and front of any development, but including this one here. In terms of electric vehicles particularly, absolutely, there's intention to have a number of electric charging points across the car park, but also things like future provision across a wider area of the car park. So as more and more electric and hybrid cars become the norm, there's more opportunity, but also future provision for HGV charging of those kind of vehicles, and that's very current technology, and that will come through as these develop. So very much at the forefront.
Thank you very much. We've had a number of questions that relate to the local plan and how this development complies with the local plan, and perhaps the suggestion that it does not.
Certainly, I'm happy to pick that up. So this site has been reviewed through the local plan process and has been identified as appropriate for employment uses under policy ES6. That policy identifies that a range of employment uses is acceptable, including storage and distribution. So the principle of the development has been established. As part of the local plan process, indicative schemes are tabled at that time to look at the suitability and the appropriateness of sites coming forward. But those aren't set through a local plan process. Individual schemes come forward subsequently, and the parameters of those individual schemes and the potential impacts and the appropriateness of those developments have to be considered against the network of policies within the local plan and on their own merits as part of any proposal. So the policy identifies a large number of reports that are required to submit support the planning application, and also some key constraints that need to be considered as part of that proposal. So the planning application, when submitted, will be accompanied by a full set of assessments which run through how we believe we meet the general policy requirements within the local plan, and why we believe that this specific planning application can be supported.
Thank you. And then a couple. Thank you, Sally. And then a couple of questions which relate to the gas main that runs across the site. What is being done with regard to that during the development?
Ian Long, would you be happy to pick that up?
Certainly, Sally. In short, yes, we are aware of the existing services on site, including the gas main. Thank you, slide 11. Thank you, Bob. The gas main is located to the western boundary. It's been mapped accurately during the pre-planning surveys, and no-go zones have clearly been identified on the drawings. Pardon me. As you can see, if I could have the following, so the next slide, please, there you go. As you can see on that particular drawing there, the development has been designed to avoid this area completely. Any works undertaken in the proximity of these zones will be carried out in accordance with the guidelines issued by the controlling authority. That's Northern Gas Networks in this instance. So I believe we have that particular issue covered. Thank you.
Just to confirm, Northern Gas will be a consultee as part of the planning application process. So whilst we've been checking to ensure that we believe that our design meets their requirements, the local authority themselves will satisfy themselves directly with those authorities that the proposal is appropriate and in accordance with their requirements. So that is something that will be picked up very carefully by the authority as well.
We've also had a number of questions related to shift patterns and the timings that lorries, etc., will be accessing the site in relation to peak traffic times within the surrounding area. So I think this was touched on earlier, but perhaps we've had one or two questions. You could expand upon that a little bit more, please.
Ian, would you be happy to just pick that up?
Yeah, I think this the first thing to say is this facility in terms of HGVs would operate 24 hours a day. So there will be HGVs coming in and out via the A58. In terms of the shift changeovers, all occupiers of units like this generally operate 2 or 3 shift patterns. We don't know the precise times of those, but they don't move their people around in the peak periods because the buildings themselves don't operate in that way to operate 9 to 5 like an office. So you get different periods of activities and therefore the shift patterns go around those activities. I think one thing I would add, just to clarify as well, that there will be some vans that come to this site, but it's not a last mile distribution centre. So you won't get a lot of vans coming out of the site. Not to say there won't be any, but there will be a few. It's primarily an HGV to HGV unit.
Thank you very much. We've also had quite a few questions with people inquiring as to who will occupy this site once built.
Ian Long, would you be able to pick that up, please?
Yeah, of course. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to divulge details of any specific client, but obviously what I can say is this will be a large automated storage and distribution warehouse facility similar to those operated by storage and distribution operators around the UK. It is normal for these facilities to be developed by companies such as ISG Retail, who specialise in the delivery of storage and distribution centres such as this for an identified operator. The name of the operator would be announced during the construction process at a time when the recruitment would begin.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions also inquiring as to whether any other sites have been considered.
I suppose I would emphasise that this is allocated for employment purposes. So this is where the authority is directing the nature of these types of operations. But indeed, developers and potential occupiers will consider all appropriate sites available within an area to try and meet their identified need. But this has been identified as an appropriate location for this form of development.
And then a couple of questions with regard to the property, the premises, once built and once in commercial use. How will it be maintained, kept secure, and a particular reference to litter?
That would fall to a final operator in terms of ensuring the appropriate management of the site. It's in every operator's interests to ensure that the sites are managed effectively and looked after effectively. If there are any concerns on those elements, the authority will be able to consider if there is any requirement for conditions to ensure that there are any form of management plans that need to be conditioned as part of the application to give comfort that the site is managed correctly and that they've got the opportunity through a condition to enforce and force any final operator to ensure they're managing their site effectively. These can take the form of, sometimes there's noise management plans, which ensure that the service yard is managed effectively and looks at minimising any effects that can come from the site. You can have travel plans, which look at the sort of public access to the site and in terms of non-car usage and promoting other forms of transport. You can have operational management plans and delivery service management plans, all set out parameters for various arrangements into the site. So it is with the final operator to ensure the correct operation of the site, but the authority will have the opportunity to request conditions if they feel that's necessary.
And then a specific question related to the construction phase. Do you expect to remove any spoil from the site, or will it just be moved around to create the bund and landscaping?
Ian Long, are you happy to answer that?
Of course. It's always our intention on plots such as this to minimise off-site removal. And so, again, as part of the initial design, we have worked to create a cut and fill neutral site to, as I say, to maximise the usage of those materials generated through a materials management plan. And but inevitably there will be some materials such as topsoil, which in these instances is often in abundance, especially in a farmer's field. So I anticipate there will be topsoil to be removed, but we will do our utmost to minimise any off-site removal of material and soil.
There are a number of questions which relate to the landscaping and the planting of trees to shield and hide part of this development. Can the panel please just expand upon that?
Are you happy to pick that up, Brett?
Yeah, that's fine, Sally. Bob, if you're able to put up the master plan, which is slide 3. The design process and the landscape strategy has gone hand in hand, and what we're showing there is obviously the indicative landscape master plan. Detailed landscape plans will be submitted with the planning application, and that will identify the types of species and the mix and the numbers, etc. One of the things we're adopting is the use of woodland planting and woodland edge planting. So you can see around the northern parts of the site, we've got blocks of woodland, and on the western side near the nursery and the cemetery, and on the eastern side near the M62, and to the south near Whitechapel Road. In total, the woodland would be in the order of about 3 hectares, which is approximately 7.5 acres of new woodland planting. That would follow accepted methods of establishment using a variety of species to establish initially, and that will be managed and maintained in the longer term through various means, but primarily through a landscape and environmental management plan. This will secure the planting and it will include management regimes to ensure the long-term effectiveness of the planting. One of the other things that we are adopting, which you can see on there, is a number of individual trees which are running alongside the access road into the site. These trees, again, we're looking at using native species to promote biodiversity benefits for the local area, but those trees in particular will be of a certain height when they go in, around 4 meters in height when they're planted, to provide a good establishment in terms of a framework of planting. So the landscape scheme will be developed and submitted as part of the application, and the local authority will consider the scheme, and they may raise comments on things such as the type of planting and etc. And we can develop that further with discussions with the local authority.
And on I guess a slightly related note, will there be direct access to the Spen Valley Greenway to encourage employees to walk or cycle to work?
Ian Dix, would you be happy to pick that one up?
Yes, yeah, that'll be fine. You can see there how close the site does run, and we're looking to divert the existing footpath that runs across the site around the edge of the site, so there's still a connection from Whitechapel Road to Whitehall Road. We're looking at the feasibility of providing an access to Spen Valley Greenway. It is outside of the site. It's feasible to do it, and we're trying to reach agreement with Sustrans, who control that route, to actually make that connection, because we do see that as a benefit. It's not something we can guarantee, because obviously we need to do it with their agreement, but we are trying to progress that.
Sorry, and a couple of, just jumping back there, a couple of questions that have just popped in with relation to the landscaping, in particular the trees. What will be the height of the trees bordering Whitechapel Road? And a slightly related question, you said they were native, will they be deciduous so that they don't lose their leaves in winter?
You okay to pick that up? Sorry, Brett.
Yeah, that's fine. I think if you were able to put up the master plan again, please, Bob, that would be very helpful. So as you can see on the Whitechapel Road, we have a very broad green frontage of new habitats there, which will include woodland planting and trees. Initially, when the woodland planting goes in, it has to be young planting to follow all the guidance on establishing woodland, and then within 10-15 years time, the woodland planting would have established and would be within the order of about 10 meters in height. So that's the normal standard growth rate for trees. We're also adopting on that frontage there, you can see hedgerows and a number of trees on Whitechapel Road. The additional element that we're also including is to repair the existing stone wall, which is in a state of disrepair, if you like, on that edge. So that would be a new stone wall going in there to provide a sympathetic edge to the road. I think hopefully that covers the question, Bob.
Thank you very much. Is there a proposed BREEAM assessment for the unit, and what level are you aiming for?
I think Simon picked that up within his statement. Would you want to just confirm, just so I don't get it wrong, Simon?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, it's BREEAM covers a number of elements in terms of sustainability and energy and things like making sure that cyclists have showers and things. And there's a sliding scale, and our target for it would be very good.
Thank you very much. And then with regard to contractors during the construction period, what is the plan for contractor parking during the construction phase?
Ian?
Of course. Yes, as is the case in these schemes, what we aim to do in all instances is, as we progress onto site and as works proceed, we create hard standings for designated material laydown, contractors parking, etc., site welfare facilities. So we will look to develop areas that are hard standings in the final scheme, the car parks and yards, on which we can then place our welfare facilities and increase our parking. So the intention is always to ensure that that we keep all our contractors parking on site as works proceed. Obviously, we encourage car share vans and things like that to minimise the number of cars that do arrive on a daily basis. But our scheduling of the works and construction will deal with the natural increase of vehicles arriving on site.
Thank you very much. We are now approaching 7:15, but perhaps there's a couple more questions I'd like to try and get in if the panel is happy just to take a couple more before we wrap up for today. One of which goes back to the local plan and actually quotes the local plan, talking with regard to how the local plan states that development should be strategically placed along core networks and should improve and maintain where possible communication routes, travel routes, to reduce congestion and reliance on the private car. What improvements are being developed in this area?
If I could hand that to Ian Dix, whilst it's a local plan question, it is predominantly relating to traffic developments and traffic plans. Would you mind picking that up, Ian?
As part of the work that supported the local plan, this site was assessed for an employment development, and it included distribution warehouses, which we're looking at now, but it also included other kinds of employment as well. And as I said in the presentation earlier, the scheme actually assessed had more traffic than we're looking at with this particular development, and that work was done by Kirklees Council and Highways England, and there was agreement this site could come forward for development. At that stage, there were no specific highway improvements identified as being needed to support that development. So the process we will go through now and what is underway as part of a planning application to bring this development forward, we will do that assessment work and look at the implications of traffic at this particular development coming forward, and then we'll discuss that with Kirklees and Highways England, and there'll be agreement reached on what, if any, off-site highway works are needed to accommodate the traffic.
Thank you very much. And just staying with the local plan, also a portion there from the local plan which says that development should create opportunities to build thriving communities which respond to local needs. Can the panel please explain how this development meets that statement?
In terms of job creation is a critical element for any community and any local authority. In terms of this proposal, it does provide the opportunity for significant employment generation for this area as a whole. As part of the planning application, we will be putting in the commitment that the end operator will work with the local authority to develop a recruitment and training plan. And what that seeks to do is to ensure that we are working with the local authority to identify specific areas to target recruitment, and also to ensure that interviews and employment opportunities are offered in the first instance to the local population as part of those proposals. So there would be a plan which identifies the criteria for working with the authority to seek to try and promote employment opportunities for the local community, which we believe would be a significant benefit.
Thank you very much. And then one final question, please, which seems an appropriate place to stop for today at least. Will there be any further public consultations after today, and if so, at what stage?
So at present, these are the two webinars that are being held, and obviously a set of newsletters is also being sent to residents within the local area. Those provide the opportunity for feedback forms, so we can consider those comments made and we can seek to respond to those within a document that we submit with the planning application. So I will always get the name wrong, but it's a statement of community comments that we will be submitting with the planning application, so the local authority will be aware of issues that you've raised. Once the planning application has been submitted, that will be advertised by the local authority. In terms of there'll be newspaper articles indicating that a planning application has been submitted, and there'll also be site notices, and the authority itself will determine if the newsletters or consultation letters need to be sent to residents within the local area. You're then provided with the opportunity to comment on the proposal at any time during the planning application consideration, and the planning authority will consider and collate any comments that have been made and seek to ensure that those are considered and taken on board as part of that review process. So this is very much the pre-consultation exercise prior to the formal planning application being submitted, and there will be opportunities for residents to comment and engage with the local authority, making known their views in relation to the proposal when it's submitted. The application documents themselves, sorry, I will just add, all full planning application documentation will be made available by the local authority on their website for review. So all documentation and all full assessments are open to the public for review.
Thank you very much, Sally. And in fact, that brings us to about 7:20. And I think we've covered off all of the topics that have been submitted through the Q&A, if not the direct questions, but at least the topics that they cover. So perhaps I could finish just by asking Ian Long just for a final word, please.
Thank you, Bob. It just remains for me to bring this event to a close now. So thank you all for attending and submitting your questions, as well as the feedback via the consultation website. I can assure you that all the discussions tonight and the feedback comments have been noted and have been taken on board as part of the process. So thank you all once again, and have a good evening.